Episode 54 is part of Founder Series, and today's guest is Chris Somogyi, founder of Evercase, which is a startup providing solutions for cold chain preservation in food and medicine. Their device, once commercially available, will have a major impact on food waste reduction and on increasing shelf life of fresh produce, meats and seafood, flowers, and medical goods like organs. So I came across Evercase at South by Southwest, where you were attending the pitch competition. What tips do you have for founders that are pitching? And did you win? Did you get some funding?
We did not get funding directly from that, and no, we did not win. But we were just thrilled to be in the finalist group, and it was actually our second kind of public display of the company.
And before that, what was the first one?
We went to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. That was wonderful, kind of overwhelming. 4 or 5 days.
Yeah. And was it? Were you trying to raise capital as part of your seed round or Series A? What's your financial situation?
Well, you're always trying to raise money, no matter where you are. That's just part of being a founder.
Yeah.
So I just view that as a default existing kind of activity. No, I mean you're out there to sort of test the premise and test the pitches and make new partnerships. So particularly in Las Vegas, we were approached by an amazing array of companies from around the world, all interested in potentially partnering.
So let's talk about global food waste. It's a topic that I deeply care about, coming from, and you also, from ex-communist Eastern Europe. I feel like, in Europe, the mindset of scarcity, which was very much omnipresent for most of the 20th century, has carried over to the 21st one, right? Like when I get food, when I buy food, I waste nothing. Literally nothing. And nor do my grandparents or my parents were always taught to finish our plate, right? There's no food waste. And when I moved to America, wow, I was so surprised to see the lack of appreciation for food, whether it's the food you buy in grocery stores or the food you get in restaurants. You have these Swedish tables, what we call, where you pay $20 and you can eat as much as you like.
Right.
And people just get these huge plates and they finish 20% of it, not even that. So one statistic from your website is that roughly 1/3 of the food produced in the world for human consumption every year, which is 1.3 billion tons, gets wasted. That's a major problem.
Well, I like to say that if you just sit and just ponder that sum, it's already bewildering. And especially when something in the 300 million people globally are in a dire food insecurity situation. But now realize how much other resource goes into all that food that you've thrown away. It's as if 3 food trucks are driving down the road and one of them just vanishes. And it's not just the food, it's all of the fertilizer, the irrigation water, the human labor, the herbicide, the fuel to move the stuff around. So it's got an amplification impact that's even more alarming.
And so what do we do about it? It's obviously it's a problem at the level of production. It's a problem at the level of consumption and our culture. It's a problem at the level of distribution. Where do you think you can have the most impact if you want to reduce food waste? What's the area that we should be focusing on?
Well, I do think it's preservation because, if we go back in history, let's go back 150, 160 years before there was freezing.
Yeah.
If you wanted to preserve food, you had to salt it or smoke it or dry it. But even then, it had a limited lifespan. So when freezing came about, it was wonderful. But freezing required all this sophisticated equipment, all this electricity, refrigerants, technical people who knew how to repair things. Right? It was a very, very big, complicated deal. And then finally we had paved roads and aircraft and intercontinental shipping. So all of this stuff kind of grew up together. If you look at it from the lens of someone in 1850, you might be so bewildered with just the incredible complexity of civilization that has occurred as your first kind of realization, and then sort of food waste would come maybe much later. So I think it's worth taking our hat off, for all of that incredible development. But the problem with food is it's biological, and so it degrades, and all food has fungus and bacteria in or on it, and those guys want to thrive as well, and they thrive by eating the food before we get a chance to. So we have to kind of we're in competition with them, is really what it's all about. And because of that, the clock is ticking. So we talk about the cold chain. And the cold chain usually is shown as kind of a place-to-place kind of scenario, from the boat to the truck. But I tend to view the cold chain as a time budget, right? So this piece of salmon that I'm pulling out of the water right now has 9 days to be eaten by somebody unless I freeze it. So that means everybody that handles this has got to be in a tremendously big hurry, and nobody can drop the ball, and we have to monitor the thing the entire way. So that's a lot of tension, and that's a lot of extra expense. For example, we fly up all of these summer fruits from South America or in Australia to Japan, or in Europe from Israel or South Africa. It's crazy to be flying plums from halfway across the world. Really.
And they're usually flown when they're green, like when they're not ripe at all, right? And then they're chemically processed and using ethane, I think, and all these chemicals to make it smell nice. And
yeah, well, that's a whole additional kind of rant about our food. The foods we eat are not necessarily the foods that are the best for us. They're the foods that are the most physically durable, right? That can stand being shipped, that can stand being stored, which makes sense. But I was reading an article a few weeks ago. Somebody did a nutritional study of a typical basket of food from 1950, produce and meats. And then a year or two ago, someone decided to repeat that test, but using today's versions of those foods. And what they found was that today's versions of those foods were about 30 to 50% less nutritious.
Like, can you give me an example?
I can't exactly quote, but if we think about the kind of breeding that we've done for selective breeding for our fruits, we want to make sure that our tomatoes don't bruise, and that our plums can withstand wider temperature range. So we've been really focusing on this durability and shippability and cosmetic appeal, and that's fine. But along the way, a plant has got to decide where to put its energy, and so the nutrition kind of took the back seat as part of this durability.
So now you're talking about genetic modification of produce?
Well, no, I mean, breeding is also genetic modification. It's just very slow genetic modification. So, yes, but I wouldn't call it GMO per se, right? It's just, even the wheat that we used to eat hundreds of years ago is characteristically different from what we eat today.
So why is it that we prefer, as you said, the cosmetic enhancements over the nutritional enhancements? If we can genetically modify food, why don't we make it more nutritious and healthier?
Well, hopefully people will start to do that. I think, most folks probably don't fully grasp the nutritional chemistry, but they do grasp that, well, that tomato's got a big nasty brown spot on it.
True. Yeah, it's a sad realization. I mean, if I look at a supermarket in the Czech Republic, half of the fresh produce would be spoiled. Like, it's very common. It's very common to go to a supermarket and spend like 10 minutes at the vegetable section just going through all the spoiled stuff to find the one that is not spoiled. Like that's the reality of Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
In America, if you go to a supermarket, everything looks perfect. All the fruits and vegetables are polished and, like presentable. It's amazing to me.
So there is a difference between the waste levels of North America and that of the rest of the world. So,
yeah.
And these numbers flop around depending on who you read. But I've seen that North America seems to be about 1/3 waste and globally 1/4. So it's not as though all of that cosmetic, focus is the entire problem, right? Mm-hmm. Just even the situation you just described. I mean, leaving rotting fruit with fresh fruit is accelerating the destruction of the fresh fruit. So sort of a level of hygiene also needs to be maintained as you're handling it. Well, but to answer your original question, I think it's just that we're dealing with a delicate, kind of precious thing, food that wants to decay, and we're in competition with these microbes who have trillions of years or trillions of cycles of optimization and evolution to be really good at consuming these foods. So we have to use our brains and our technology to try to combat that. So I'm not so much angry about the food waste. As an engineer, I just view it as a problem that we need to attack and fix.
So at what part of the life cycle of produce is there the largest waste? Is it at the farming farming level? Is it the distribution? Is it the consumption level?
It varies by food type, but it does tend to be much more at the consumer and restaurant, food service kind of side, grocer. Although there's stories at each step. If we think about the bycatch of fishing, just kind of heartbreaking, really. If we think about, I was speaking with a large corporate farmer in Australia who grows broccoli, and he said, "Look, I'm as automated as you can get, but we got to pick all of the broccoli pretty much at the same time," and we do, and then it goes into, we have to sort of store it until all of my human workers can clean it and cut it and bag it, and it's just sort of
all of this is done on site.
It's done on site, but it's the classic sort of inventory management challenge. We have the pile is bigger than the workers, and so every hour that one piece of broccoli is waiting for someone to get to it, it's degrading, right? So again, it's this race against time. Yeah. And so even on the farm, you'll see this. But grocery stores, I've met with senior people at grocery chains in Europe, in Canada, United States, and we've had some good exposure deep in the bowels of these stores and their distribution centers, and the spoilage rates tend to go from, I'd say, about 7% up to 30% in seafood, meat, bakery, floral, produce. It's unbelievable. Just bins and bins and bins of food that even looks, some of that beautiful food that you were talking about, it's still in that bin because they don't know.
That's ridiculous. So what's done to the food to delay the rotting? Is there any chemical procedure? Any special packaging?
For Evercase's solution? No, that's one thing we're really happy about. There are some companies that have come up with various things like silk coatings that you'd put on produce that kind of helps. There's certain atmospheres that you can put the fruit into. For example, apples and pears you can store for months in alternate atmosphere. I'd say...
What's alternate atmosphere?
Alternate atmosphere would be like nitrogen or carbon dioxide. So it is not in oxygen, so they lower the temperature a little bit, and that's why you can get apples in February. So kudos to those guys, because they've really figured that out. Problem is you can't do that with cherries or plums or apricots. So what we do is no chemicals, no films, no additives of any kind. We work with freezing to find its positives, but we take away its negatives. So the positives of freezing is that when you get down to like -5, -8, -10, -12 Celsius, the bacteria and the fungal colonies kind of stop. They won't propagate. They're in there. They're everywhere. So
they don't die off. They just stop.
They don't die off. They'll just stop. They just stop producing, and that's great. However, when water freezes, it takes up more room as ice than it does as water. That's why ice cubes float, because they're less dense. That's why icebergs float. And so that's kind of a weird thing. You don't typically see that in most materials, but water is like that. And when it does expand like that, it's a very strong, sharp, hard expansion. And if you're a sort of pliable tissue in a strawberry or in a piece of salmon, you are getting ripped apart. So your fiber structures get destroyed, your cell walls get broken, and you have enzymes that are inside the cell actually now leach out into the meat, the muscles, and you get faster degradation. So freezing And then, of course, when you thaw, say, some berries or some salmon, you'll get that puddle of water, right? That's full of nutrients and goodness, and it's damage. And then the product will smell different, it will taste different, it will have a lower nutritional value, it'll be lower in actual dollar value, and it'll cook differently. So we want to get the benefits of freezing, lowering the temperature to the point where the microbes stop growing.
What's the temperature?
Well, it depends on the microbes, but really anything below zero will start to do a great job. But to avoid this physical damage, and the way we do that is we don't allow ice to form in the food. So we keep that from happening.
How do you do that?
So it turns out that, well, one of the reasons that water takes up more room as ice than as water is because it likes to form these hydrogen bonds, if you remember from high school chemistry. And so water molecule has a very interesting natural electric polarity to it. Very strong. The hydrogen does not want any electrons, the oxygen loves them. And similarly, water molecules also have a magnetic moment. It's almost as if they're kind of tiny magnets. And that's part of the reason that MRI can work as well, because you excite them and then you spin them. So we exploit these kind of tensions, these sort of imbalances in the water molecule, and basically stimulate them with oscillating magnetic fields and oscillating electric fields of very low power and pretty low frequencies, but just the right characteristics, just the right wave shape, just the right phasing, just the right geometry to basically keep these water molecules from being able to settle down, line up, pull
So
apart.
they're floating around in your case?
Well, no, the water is in the strawberry. It's in the food is in the strawberry.
But it never hardens. It
It
never
never
goes
hardens. No, the amazing we have this stack of videos, everything from mushrooms to oysters to shrimp to pineapple to mangoes, and it's just amazing. You'll take out the control and it's hard as a rock. You could drive a nail with it. You take out ours and it's pink and supple and fresh and yummy and lovely. Really, when you first see it yourself, it's kind of bewildering. So we're thrilled to be able to do it. Doesn't affect the quality of the food at all. Well, it does. It improves it. So the frozen food is not something you would really want. And if you're in the food business, for example, if you're a fisherman, we understand in Australia that it's about $1 a kilo less for the frozen version of that fish than the fresh. But now think about yourself as a fisherman. You've got this giant boat full of expensive fuel. You got all these people on the boat. So you're in this race, like, how do I fill the belly of the boat without taking too long and not having to freeze it because then I lose all this value? So it's this crazy, again, tension. The whole cold chain is about tension.
So how do they do it? If they're not using a freezer?
They typically do use a freezer.
They do use
how
a freezer.
how they do it in most cases. However, if we think about the salmon farms, like in the Faroe Islands or Iceland or Norway or Scotland, they've got that whole cold chain down like an incredible machine, right? So they'll pull the salmon out of the pens, they'll process them, and they'll put them either on airplanes, or if they're close enough, they'll put them on a ship to the east coast of the U.S. So, for example, we've been talking to all of those companies who don't want to have to pay for air freight, and they don't want to have to freeze them. Yeah. And they want to be able to get further than just the East Coast. I mean, okay, I might be able to just get a really fast boat from Iceland to Boston, but there's no way I'll be able to get it to Los Angeles or Austin. How would that happen, right? No, it has to be on an airplane.
Yeah. So if I go to a supermarket and I see salmon and it says fresh, never frozen, how did it get to where it is? And how long does it last like this?
Well, it depends. It depends on, no, you mean now or with our system?
Let's say, now,
Okay.
without Evercase.
Well, typically then, it depends on the food. It might have been grown, 10 miles away. If it's salmon in Austin, and it says fresh, it probably was raised in a salmon pen, I'd guess in Norway or in Canada, processed literally overnight and flown down. Maybe from Canada, could have been driven, but obviously from Europe, it would have to be air shipped over here.
But if it says never frozen, how do they? What do they store?
They keep it in ice or dry ice, so it'll get close to zero. Might even dip a little bit below zero, but it will not have been hard frozen ideally.
Mm-hmm. And that lasts how long?
Again, depends. And what's curious is it's a little bit the discretion of the vendor. So that whole use by, sell by thing, that's more of a guideline-y kind of scenario. And it's driven as much by the lawyers who work at the food stores as by the FDA or the USDA. But salmon it ticks pretty fast, so that's typically got, when it hits the grocery store, fresh salmon will typically only have 4 or 5 days left on it at best.
That's crazy,
right? And then you buy it and you take it home, and you're like, "We'll have salmon right now."
Yeah.
Well, we can't because somebody's at a party and they won't. We'll have it tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Okay, well now you're running out of time, and
then you end up freezing it anyways.
Freezing it or throwing it away. Yeah.
And so with Evercase, how long does it last?
So the longest test we've done is 2.5 months for some chicken breasts. We've done beef for about a month and a half. Most of our salmon tests we typically do for about 3 weeks. We actually have never found what the maximum is. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because, as a spin out from the University of Hawaii, we've had a limited number of systems, and we're always very busy testing one thing onto the next. So we don't know what the maximum is. But when we share just these numbers with folks in the grocery business, they say, "You're tripling my longevity of my salmon, even just with 3 weeks." In fact, so we were approached by a large grocery chain in Europe. They feature seafood in a very lovely way. The grocery stores in Europe, for the most part, they're pretty. The big chains like Auchan and Tesco, they're Lidl, Spar. They're kind of functional, I guess I would say. So this one store, I won't mention their name, goes out of their way to make the fish buying experience kind of like visiting an old world fishing village with all the ambiance that comes with that. And that's great, but because of that, and it draws in customers. And they lose $100 million a year on spoiled seafood, but it's worth it to them competitively, right? Yeah. So they went to their supplier of refrigeration equipment and asked, "Can you guys please come up with some technology that will save us just even a couple of days?" Yeah. And that's how we've entered into this one relationship already.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of Evercase and how it's used, it's kind of like a box, right? And it's used with current freezers and refrigerators. So it doesn't work on its own.
Well, it can. I'll say that refrigeration technology is it's pretty well known. Mm-hmm. It's almost high school level. Mechanics, compressors, all of this stuff. Most of the compressing equipment is Chinese at this point anyway. So we can definitely put that on. Right now we're mostly working with customers for bespoke solutions, whether it's display cabinets or shipping or storage or warehousing equipment. And so sometimes they want refrigeration equipment, sometimes they don't. Our very first commercial sale, which I think I may have made actually just this morning, was to a food company, and they have all these walk-in freezers, so it won't have a freezer attached. But just parenthetically, that food company, which I can't mention, is keen to reduce the preservatives in their foods. There's a lot of packaged foods and prepared foods, and they're always accused of using too much preservative, and it's not as though they don't hear. It's just that that's really hard to change. And so when they heard about our technology, they asked, "Do you think we might be able to get away with really reducing the preservative count and still keep the foods in top form?" I believe you can. So they've ordered a few systems for their research group to see if they can't reformulate some of their foods.
That would be amazing. Wow, that's great. I didn't know that you could do that. So this company is producing food, or they're a supermarket?
This particular company is a food maker.
Food maker.
Yeah.
And you make custom boxes for them, or what's?
Sure, we're happy to whatever.
That's like, if you think about it from a business perspective, that's not very scalable. If you have different customers and you have to customize like every single box for their use case.
Well, I guess I would maybe point to General Motors, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at a Chevrolet and a Buick and a Cadillac,
Yeah.
it's the same car, okay, just with different grille and different leather, right? So the guts are the same,
Yeah.
and that's really ours as well. So if you want it this big or that big or round or square or tall or with refrigeration or not, okay. I mean, to me that's.
But they didn't start this way, right? Now they're a multi-billion-dollar company, but they started simple with one car, one use case.
True, but even in the refrigeration world, if we look at like the display cabinet makers, that is 90% aesthetics. It's mostly carpentry and aesthetic. Do you want a round glass? Do you want a shiny stainless steel cover? Do you want
Right.
yeah? So that's not a terribly complex thing. But I'll tell you one thing I really treasure about my European background is, when you go from Prague to Budapest to Vienna to Ljubljana, it's all kind of similar, but it's all kind of not similar, right? And that whole ability to kind of let 1,000 different flowers bloom, not 1,000 of the exact same flower, I like that a lot about Europe. And I would say perhaps in the U.S., our rush to make as bland a product as possible in as large a quantity at the lowest production price as possible. I appreciate, my MBA tells me I appreciate the aspects of that, but another part of me really is disappointed with that. So we have to delight the customer. We have to bring about, a solution that people will want to embrace quickly for their benefit and our collective benefit and for our shareholders' benefit.
So do you produce it in the USA?
Well, so far, yes. But we are expecting to have...
Have you produced anything? Or is it still in the prototyping phase?
Yes and yes. So, yeah, I expect our first deliveries will be later this summer.
That's awesome. And this is to this food company that you just sold to?
That, and we have 5 other orders with a variety of fishing companies, appliance companies, research universities,
What's the useful life of Evercase? And how much savings do these companies achieve that you sell to?
Sure. Well, how much savings will really depend on the specifics. The best...
in orders of magnitude.
Well, let me give you a specific statistic that will maybe satisfy this line of query, okay? We were asked by a very large company that everybody would know that has a grocery chain affiliated with it, but I can't mention them. They said, well, wait a minute. Let's take seafood. We've got this 10% seafood loss in our stores. If we put your gizmo into our display cabinets, you will use more electricity than just the normal freezer, won't you? I said, yes, some. Okay, well, that's a carbon footprint. That's an additional carbon footprint. Some. Do the calculation, please, Chris, of what it would cost to go out and refish those 10% of fish that we had to throw away versus the extra electricity of keeping all of the fish supercooled for longer periods of time. So I did it.
Yeah.
It took a while. But it came out to be 16 times higher carbon footprint to recatch the fish than to use the electricity. And I used the dirtiest, smelliest, nastiest coal plant as my electricity generator 16 times. So that ended the whole, anxiety instantly.
That's crazy. 16 times. And that includes the carbon emission in relation to the food waste as well, right? Because when you expose food.
Doesn't include that. This is just literally going out, catching the fish, and shipping it.
Wow. That's crazy. Well, one stat from your website is that food losses and waste amount to $680 billion in industrialized countries, and about half of that in developing countries. I'm like, what are the companies that are solving this? This is huge. There's a huge economic opportunity. What are some of the other companies, not necessarily in the storage, case, that are solving food waste?
Well, first let me just say that it is so huge. I mean, this may be my last startup, but it's a great one, right? Because
it's a great one.
It's hard to think of any aspect of our complex civilization that is so in desperate need of efficiency tuning. So it's very satisfying from that standpoint. Well, as I mentioned earlier, there are some companies that have various coatings that they'll spray on foods that'll give them a few extra days. Certainly faster shipping, better. There's a lot of just software and logistics, like where is that container? I don't know. There's a lot of food waste that has happened because someone lost track of where the container is, or there was a strike in the port, or who knows what. Or in grocery stores, I was stunned to see. I expected kind of every bin of every piece of food to be, in some database. But in one very large chain I went into in North America, each store had a whiteboard and sort of barely legible numbers sort of scribbled on the whiteboard, and that's how they kept track of their spoilage rates.
But you said most of the waste happens at the point of consumption, right? Is it because restaurants, especially in the US, give people too large portions? Is it because people buy too much, right? If you buy a butter or milk, you have a gallon of milk. Like, who can drink that? And once you open it up, it goes rotten in like 3 days. So isn't that the issue?
I could see that being part of the issue.
It's the capitalism, greediness, overconsumption.
Could be, but it's also, here's another, if you want to stay on the capitalism side, I could say that, let's say you're a restaurant, and let's say you did a sloppy job of knowing when to throw away that salmon, and somebody got horribly sick, and you got a giant lawsuit, and your reputation was destroyed. So you don't want any of those things. So the smart move is, if I have even the slightest suspicion that this isn't extremely perfect, I'm throwing it away.
Wow.
And of course, as a parent, you don't want to feed your kids anything that you're not sure about.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say like, ooh, where do we point the blame? I'd say, where do we point the innovation gun? It's like, well, where do we need to have even more ideas and better ideas? Like, I'd love to be able to look at that piece of salmon and just point my phone at it and go, 4 more days, happy as camper.
How many people actually, when you have packaging, look at the use by date versus use common sense?
I think most.
Most use common sense?
No.
They just look at the use
Well,
by.
I mean, they hope that is common sense, right? Because they're thinking, well, who would put that on there? These are scientists at some big company. Surely they know what they're doing. Probably better than I do.
Well, you said they're lawyers. They're not scientists.
True, but, again, just think the average person walking down the street, are they going to understand food science and microbe colony propagation? No.
Yeah. I guess it's a matter of culture. In Eastern Europe, we have a part of a supermarket that's for expired food, and it's legal. You can sell expired food at a large discount, and it's actually one of the busiest parts of a supermarket, always. Again, that's the culture that we live in, that carried over from the 20th century of scarcity, and you don't have that here. I guess it's because the legal implications of that in the U.S. are much larger than
I have seen places that actually do that.
They do that?
Yeah.
Or like imperfect vegetables. If you have a vegetable or a fruit that's not in a perfect shape, right? Like, do you have to dispose of it? Like, it's perfectly fine?
Well, I'll tell you that the processed food manufacturers don't do that. So if you're buying a carrot cake from, I don't know, some big company, the people at that company factory, they're not looking at the carrots and saying, oh, this one is slightly deformed, this won't go into it. But no, they're happy to take the most deformed one. Why not? I mean, because it's going to be ground up and thrown into the cake. So they're using, prudent selection criteria. It's just that, I think the other thing is, if you're on the home side, people have had a hard day, a long day at school, a long day at work. You want to make the dinner kind of this wonderful thing. It's you want, and it's a point of pride. It's beautiful, it's tasty, it's healthy, and you don't want to take any chances with that.
That's true. So you said this is not your first startup. You've built companies before, and you said this may be your last startup.
I don't know. I'm 63. It's hard to say. It's a lot of work. Startups are a lot of work.
They are. So what were your previous startups, and how did you get to solving food waste?
Sure. My very first one was out of the University of Washington. It was a medical device company. It was basically a catheter locating system, and we got funding from Japanese venture capitalists. We got some SBIRs, and I did corporate partnering deals with Medtronic and Becton Dickinson, and that was great. The second one was a company called Dentogenics, which is regrowing teeth in the mouth, which is very cool. It turns out we have stem cells in our teeth, but we can't get them to rebuild our teeth. Kangaroos can do it, but people can't. So we figured out how to wake up those stem cells and get them to repair a very big cavity and rebuild dentin in the tooth. So that was cool. And we even licensed technology to regrow an entire tooth in your mouth from scratch. So we sold that to Europe's leading dental company in Liechtenstein, and that was exciting. I did another one that didn't go anywhere. It was kind of before the white LED came around. We had some new chemistries for the LED technology out of the University of Washington. That one failed. I had another one out of Princeton in metamaterials, which is kind of the cloaking technology, and all kinds of amazing new, basically optical optical processing instead of electrons. You use photons. That's still up and running. Some DARPA grants. And that was probably the most intellectually stimulating one, and I'm still hopeful for that. And then most recently, I did one called Blue Nalu, which we started in Hawaii, and it's in San Diego, and that's done quite well. It's raised about $80 million. It's growing seafood in the lab from muscle cells of fish.
Is it like cultured meat?
Exactly, yeah.
I like that. I've been waiting for commercially available cultured meat, but it's not on the horizon.
Well, if you move to Singapore, you could go get it.
They have it there?
It's legal, and I think in Israel it's probably legal. In Europe, I think you'll see the Netherlands probably being the first one to roll it out. That's kind of the birthplace of this, I'd say. And actually the U.S., even in the past administration and this administration, working pretty smoothly and I'd say aggressively to clear all the hurdles to bring that to market. So can you do it? Yes. Is it legal and regulated properly? It will be. Can you make it, back to your scale question, can you make it at a price point that even comes close to regular food? That's the challenge, and there's a million finance-related issues having to do with infrastructure, hardware, and yields. And so you have to remember that a fermentation tank has no immune system, and our body is a very big immune system. Yeah. So all those little gizmos that want to eat all that stuff that you're growing, there's no police in town,
My friend in London is actually working on a growth medium for cultured meat to make it scale. I haven't got up with her in a while, so I don't know what stage she's at. But she's been doing good stuff. I think it has so much potential because all these Beyond Meat, Impossible Meat is just not healthy for you, and it doesn't taste the same, right? And so having cultured meat would actually be a game changer.
Yeah, so when I was doing Blue Nalu, I was doing all these rounds with all these conferences and everything. And I went to a pea protein conference in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. That's the kind of extent you have to do. And there's all this talk about how excited the plant-based folks were about using pea protein and pea starch and so forth. And we kind of mapped out, all right, what does it take to make a plant-based piece of meat? How many trucks have got to ship this derivative or that derivative off to some plant for another and another and another? And my wife had a great phrase. She says, look, if you want to eat pea-based meat, just eat peas.
That's a good point, yeah. So why are we making these, why do we call it meat even?
Oh boy, there's a room full of people that would throw rocks at each other over that one. It's not meat, and frankly, milk. Oat milk is not milk.
True.
Our language gets beat up a lot, so it'd be nice if we could maintain accuracy in our terms. Why people buy plant-based meat? That's a psychology question. And as a capitalist, you're like, well, I don't care as long as they do. But I'd say if the motivation is, to kind of save the resources and be good to our environment, I think the just eat the peas is probably worth contemplating as an alternative.
Mm-hmm. Are you a vegetarian or vegan?
I've been an aspiring vegetarian multiple times, but I'm just a combination of lazy and I think mostly lazy, I guess.
Do you think that the argument that being a vegetarian is lessens your impact on the climate, is that a valid argument or not really?
It depends on what kind of vegetarian or what kind of carnivore or omnivorian you might be. It really depends on the food. I guess you could say that, but in biology, we are in the dark ages of biology. Honestly, we're complete imbeciles. So we don't even know what we don't know.
Yeah.
So to make a blanket statement that it's okay to be a vegetarian because our body doesn't need meat protein, I don't know. I don't know if anybody honestly can look you in the eye and tell you for sure. There's plenty of people who assert that we were designed to eat meat, and our biology was designed for it, and there could be repercussions that we aren't even aware of. So I welcome more conclusions on that. I had no judgment. If people want to be one way or the other in their diet, that's fine. As capitalists, we like to give them options.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's interesting, how many counter arguments there are when it comes to diet, how many different movements there are these days.
And go back in history 30 or 40 years. There's a long legacy of things that people are absolutely certain about now, pounding the table with certainty, which were the 180 degrees the other way 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And probably 20 years into the future, we'll see the same thing. So that's why I think it's good not to pound the table about anything, frankly.
Yeah, I agree. So you've built all these companies that had some kind of innovation in them, right? Mm-hmm. You said light bulbs was one of that failed.
Yeah.
What did you learn from that failure? Why would it fail?
That was mostly technical. Just say that to make an LED is basically it's a very complicated sandwich of all these layers, and each layer has got to have its own particular chemistry, and how you apply the layer has to have its own chemistry, and it can't affect the other ones. And it went from being I'll just make a ham sandwich to this 30-layer kind of nightmare of novelty. It just got out of hand, and we just didn't have the resources that Philips, or Osram had. But also, I'd say my whole career has been about innovation. Before that, I worked at Stanford University, where I licensed technology. So my job was to go over and meet professors and listen to their ideas, and if they sounded good, to get a patent and then go and get it licensed. So, for example, I found myself working on the MRI portfolio, which is largely developed at Stanford, and I'd hop on a plane and go to Germany and sit, in my rumpled suit from Sears, across from 9 Siemens, I mentioned a company, Siemens lawyers, all in full Armani, and I learned a lot about licensing and negotiation patents. But I had 2 Nobel Prize winners as my client professors. One of them was Stephen Chu, the Secretary of Energy. Stanford is an amazing place, and just being in and around that was great. I was, about a year after I left or so, one of my colleagues happened to be at the reception desk when Sergey and Larry stumbled in saying, what do we do? We got this technology, what do we do with it?
Well, they wanted to open source it at first, and then they realized it wasn't a good idea.
Right, and then they tried to sell it to Microsoft and Apple, and they weren't interested. And so my friend, who's still there, he introduced them to the first angel investors, and the rest is history. So
why did you go from academia to industry?
Well, I was just an employee of Stanford, so I wasn't a professor. And I'd had industry jobs before then. But generally, your question...
Or being a startup founder, right? That's a huge leap.
Well, I also worked at big companies. I worked for a company that makes defibrillators, medical device companies, and I just recently worked at Xerox PARC. They're all kind of different. I mean, big institutions, whether it's a university. I also worked for the New Zealand government managing the country's innovation grant system. The bigger the institution, the more it's about policy, and the more it's about, kind of forcing everybody into a certain lockstep behavior. You can't have, you can't have unwieldy cats running around in every direction.
Yeah.
And so if you're a person who likes creativity, you don't like being told to march this way with this hat on, so I guess I'm like that. But I realize that in order to actually affect the change, you do. So in my mind, there's always been this tension between just sitting back and being as unencumbered by previous, context as possible, so I can be fully creative. And then the hard part, like, going to the dentist sort of part is corralling that in and putting discipline on it and turning it into something that, is useful and can manifest that change that you were seeking in the first place. So as an entrepreneur, you have to go through all of that. You have to go through the wild hair on fire, crazy idea phase to the buttoned up process kind of phase.
What give you confidence that the research based on which you founded Evercase was going to turn into a commercially viable product? Because a lot of the times it's very difficult to commercialize things.
Yeah, well, just bravery. I don't know what stupidity and bravery. There's many things I'm not brave about. Like, I'm really afraid of heights.
Okay.
But I got a pilot's license because I sort of figured out, oh, well, if I'm up in this thing, I've got these wings, so it's cool. But I'm, as an entrepreneur, you have to be like, well, we'll just jump off the cliff and worry about what's below later, and we'll figure it out. So I guess it's just that faith in creativity and accommodating. We were talking about Eastern Europe. My parents were in Budapest in 1956, and things were going bad, and they just said, we're out of here. And they didn't know what they were doing. They hopped into a freight truck and had to pay people in gold coins, and they found themselves crawling through landmines and machine gun fire. They didn't know where the border was. And somehow they made it out alive, and somehow they made it to America, and somehow they had a great life. And, that's one thing about having a human brain or being an advanced mammal, I guess, is we have the ability to figure things out. That's part of the fun in life.
It's admirable, yeah. So many people who emigrated, from Europe really went through the hardship, and it's I respect them. So tell me about talking about commercial viability. Is Evercase B2B, B2C? Are you planning to sell, boxes that people could put in their fridges, freezers, or is it more, you're selling to food producers, supermarkets?
Well, I don't know. I don't know where the future will take us. I'll tell you that my business philosophy for a startup generally is to be a good, close partner to large strategics, select strategics, because it's hard to think of any more powerful force, I think, in commerce than market share lust, right? So 2 or 3 giant companies, they spend all of their lives just trying to steal 4 or 5 market share points from each other. They spend gargantuan amounts of money trying to do that in advertising and product. So there's nothing more important than that. So as a little company, you're all about leverage. How can I, with my little pea shooter, make a big impact? So you look at those points of high tension of where there's almost no differentiation between company A and company B, and you come in there with some meaningful differentiation that can swing big market share. Now you've got something to talk about. So I love doing that. I think that's a great way to start a company, and that's how we are starting. So even with consumer, we are definitely targeting consumer versions, whether they'll say Evercase on them or they'll say somebody else, and we'll be an OEM in the beginning. I don't know. We'll see where life takes us.
But don't you think that a key determinant of success in startups is focus? Like choosing a segment and then delivering the best product to that segment?
Yeah, but I actually think, at least in America, and especially among, and I've been a venture capitalist too. I've managed part of a $700 million fund. I think this adoration of focus and this adoration of scale may sound great, but it's also worth remembering that 9 out of 10 venture-backed companies fail. Now, it could be because 9 out of 10 entrepreneurs are idiots, but it could also be that they've been steered into the wrong direction. As an entrepreneur, you are constantly having to think. Imagine as a soccer player, right? You've got the ball, the goalie just handed you the ball, and the goal is to score a goal. I would say the American philosophy is run a perfect straight line at exactly the same speed and don't change anything. Focus exactly on the goal and never change direction. I would say that's not what happens. In order to score the goal, you've got to run to the left, run to the right, spin, turn around, fall down, get up, use your head, use your left foot, use your right, whatever the hell it takes to get to the goal. And that's what an entrepreneur has to do. So if you force, there's a great scene in this movie, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, where they're trying to go straight. And the Sundance Kid is trying to show this Bolivian mining guard that he knows how to shoot. So the guard throws his coin out there.
Yeah.
You know this one?
I don't.
Okay, and Sundance goes into his move. He's got this kind of move where he shoots, and he does that. And the guy says, "No, just stand there and shoot." Okay, and he stands there and he shoots and he misses it, and then he says, "Can I move?"
Yeah.
And it's okay, and he moves and he shoots it perfectly. And I think that's just it. If you can't move and you have to stand there, you're going to get crappy results. You got to move.
That's a great point. So how do you, what does the partnership look like? How do you build it? What do the contracts look like? What are the deliverables? How do you ensure that you have some kind of leverage and that the company is not going to go off and build their own thing without you?
Well, those are legal terms. First of all, patents. You've got your patents, and we have quite a few from the University of Hawaii and Xerox and our own. That's the first one. And there's trade secrets. And then, of course, it's good to partner with companies that aren't going to be, perfectly able to do something like that, right? Mm-hmm. So I love to work with, food companies won't have, vast numbers of electrical engineers, mm-hmm. right? But also some of the physics principles that we're using are kind of out there enough where, even folks who just work with compressors and pumps, it's probably not in their domain. We also have some interesting new materials that we're using.
Yeah.
So, but at the end of the day, it's a person. You got to be able to look this company in the eye and feel like this is a true partnership. And I can sort of smell a rat most of the time, mm-hmm. and I have said no to several companies that I just didn't feel would be trustworthy in a partnership.
Was it because of the person you were dealing with?
No, it was usually the institution. I mean, when you buy, I don't know if you've bought a car in the United States. Mm-hmm. Well, there's this technique. You walk into the car, try it. Just for fun, you should try this. Yeah. And some, bushy-tailed, bright-eyed person comes, "Hi there, how's it going?" And they're your best friend for the first, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And then they desperately want you to say, "I'm interested." And the next thing you know, you're meeting a very unpleasant person, in an office, the finance guy, and he's no jokes, no nothing. And it sort of gets nastier and nastier the closer you get to taking possession of the car. So same thing I think in all kind of human sales realms. You have to actually see what the system is and don't buy the big smile that you get in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about your team and how did you think about building that?
Well, a lot of startups will just license something from a university and leave the inventors with almost nothing. Yeah. But we didn't want to do that. This is the life's work of this professor, Sujin Jun, a decade under USDA funding. So to me, as also I've got 25 patents of my own as an inventor, it's important. So
you wanted to make sure he was part of the team.
He's a very big part of the team. He's actually he's the largest individual shareholder. Mm-hmm. And that was completely unnecessary in American venture parlance, actually. And the University of Hawaii is a shareholder, and Xerox is a shareholder also. So frankly, everybody that has a role, some of my colleagues at Xerox that were very helpful in the thinking and forming have founder shares as well. In terms of technical, so my board is two people that I've worked with for a long time. One is a lady, Charlotte Guyman, that I knew from business school, and our kids became friends. She's been on the board of Berkshire Hathaway for the past 20 years, so she's incredible experience and wisdom and connections. And the other one, Al Steffen, an engineer who led Seattle's premier engineering service company for decades. So I trust them. I know them. And the engineers and scientists and marketing people, I really like to take people out for a good long test drive.
What questions do you ask them?
It's not. I would never make a decision based on a handful of questions. I would make a decision based on months of observing their behavior. It's like when my wife and I were contemplating, being a couple, we decided to take a road trip from San Francisco to New Orleans, where I was going to grad school.
Yeah.
And we had to go through the most incredible tribulations with, exploding radiators, and it was, you really put yourself into these challenging moments together, and you see the true personalities come out. And I think unless you've had enough time together where you've seen the challenges and the highs and the lows, you really don't see the whole person. So I frankly like to test drive my core colleagues with time and just see how they do.
That's a great advice. Just take them on a road trip and see how they perform.
Yeah.
How do you, talking about finances, how do you price the product?
Well,
because it's all custom, right? Based on the.
Well, yes and no. So the guts are not custom, right? The guts will be definitely repeatable. So in the beginning, we are selling mostly for evaluation purposes. In mass production, just as likely the first mass-produced products will not have our name on it. It'll be an OEM sale. And how do we price it? Well, so we want to work with our customers and say, well, they want to make a new display cabinet that will be wildly different from somebody else's, so they'll get market share. So the final pricing decision is up to them, right, for the final product.
Yeah.
But obviously, we've got our requirement. Generally, I'd say, there's an opportunity here to use value-based pricing, like that model I gave you about the salmon carbon footprint. Throwing away 10% of all of your salmon on a weekly basis adds up to a pretty big number, way bigger than the cost of a normal freezer. But we also have to work within the confines of what people deem, reasonable. So in the beginning, we're leasing. We like that model. But, you can't always capture all the value, but you also don't want to sell yourself short just for market share gain. That'll be one of the more fun, intellectually challenging aspects as we grow.
How do you decide which markets to enter? Recently, you entered a partnership with a customer from Asia, Aqua, right?
They're
on your website.
They're an American company, but they operate grouper fisheries in Thailand.
Mm-hmm. And then you have partners in America, in Europe. Again, focus.
Australia. I'm focused on seizing opportunity. It's you ever I don't know, in Prague, do they have those horse carriages in some part of town? Do they have those?
We do. Yeah.
Okay. Well, those poor horses.
Okay.
And they've got those blinders on them.
Yeah.
And that means the driver doesn't want the horse to see anything off to the left or the right. Just keep your eye exactly on the straight line. So. And I hear this a lot, actually, from American venture capitalists too. Focus. And it's like
that's what I've been hearing.
So you want me to only focus in exactly this one fact, 179 degrees, just there. So if there's a giant pot of gold at 179.2, I'm not allowed to look there.
Well, eventually you can, but if you look at economies of scale, you have a manufacturing facility in one country. You have to think about the supply chain, and that brings a lot of complications if you have customers all over the world that you haven't delivered to.
Well, I don't plan on not delivering to them.
Well, we'll see.
So again, the guts are probably going to be made in the United States until we get to big volumes. The fine tuning could be made locally to the customer's preference. But no, I mean to say we are not even going to consider pursuing an Asian customer until we've got 50 solid American ones. Just seems really shooting yourself in the foot. We can handle it. We're multilingual. We're multicultural. We've got all kinds of citizenships. I have people in Australia, pretty much every ethnicity you could think of, with great contacts from India to Israel to South Africa to all over Europe, Canada, South America. We were approached by a floral exporter from Colombia. Our top scientist is a lady in Barcelona with a PhD in physics and an MBA, and she's also kind of our in-house Spanish communicator. Yeah. So no, I think to restrict yourself to something in the name of focus, it's as if focus has some kind of religious wonder to it. I think I wouldn't be quite so quick to celebrate the fabulousness of focus. I would say it's a two-edged coin, and it's got negatives to it, and it blinds you from other opportunities if you praise it too much.
That's interesting perspective. So when it comes to general advice or first tell me your timeline. Like, when are you planning to launch? Where do you plan to be 5-10 years from now?
Alive, hopefully. I have no idea.
Like in terms of Evercase,
just keep moving forward, and see where life takes you. I'm sure when Bill Gates was on that airplane writing BASIC, hoping that he'll have it done in time for those IBM guys that show up, he probably wasn't thinking, and then we'll do the internet, but first we'll make CDs, right? So you don't know really where life will take you. We plan to just have a good company that makes great products, that delights our customers, and is profitable for us, and is a great place to work, and pushing that innovation horizon all the time to help solve this perishable crisis that we're all dealing with. And if we do all that correctly, then fortune will smile on us and we'll see new opportunities.
That would be great. I hope so. In terms of, aspiring founders, a lot of my listeners are either founders in the early stages or people who want to found companies. What advice would you have for them?
Be very careful who you take advice from.
Okay. That's a good one. Well, thank you so much for the conversation. We're past an hour, but it was a pleasure speaking with you.
My pleasure.